Hello.
Hi, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our last webinar this year, the Inclusive Design webinar. We have here in the studio Dr. Marian Stuiver from Wageningen University, Dr. Franz from the University of the District of Columbia, and also Eric Harris from the same institution. So we are going to spend the next hour discussing how to design inclusive architecture, and we have the best experts in the room to discuss those topics. The first presentation will be by Dr. Stuiver, and you will have a chance to ask any clarification questions after this presentation, but the idea is that we have some discussion at the end of the second presentation. You are very welcome to put your questions in the chat. We have Monica joining as a moderator of the chat, so she will keep an eye on your questions, and we'll try to answer as many as possible during and at the end of presentations. And well, I wish you a very pleasant experience, and we are looking forward to your interactions. And I give the floor to Marianne now.
Yes. Good afternoon, or maybe good morning. It depends on where you're from. So, my name is Marian Stuiver, and I'm going to start this talk on inclusive design. And we have called it Social Equity for Human Dignity, Promoting Physical, Social, Mental, and Spiritual Health. And as you know, it's essential for this edition of the Urban Greenhouse Challenge because it's a social impact edition. Before I start, I really want to ask you to put in the chat where you're from and also what your expertise is. So what kind of student are you? What are you doing? And you might also maybe type something on the topic of inclusive design. Are you familiar with it, or is it brand new to you? It would be really nice if you could put something in the chat while I'm having my talk. So the whole talk will be about three topics. Why is inclusion urgent is the first one. The second one is the building blocks of inclusion. And the third one is a design canvas for inclusion. And I will address the first two topics, and Anna and Eric, or Dr. Harris and Dr. Franz, will do the design canvas for inclusion. So why is inclusion urgent? Well, inclusion is, we'll of course explain what it is afterwards, but basically it means that all people, whatever their background, whatever their preferences, etc., are included in the design. Well, we have, as you know, a large world population, approximately 7.9 billion, as reported by the United Nations, and the differences between the populations is huge, especially in urban areas. You can see that there are many challenges with population growth, causing economic, ecological, and environmental issues to be addressed. Population growth and the resulting challenges lead to shelter, food, education, and job insecurity, and ultimately also social degradation and exclusion, because of course inclusion is the opposite of exclusion, which means that certain groups of people and individuals are excluded from all aspects of urban life. And cities are therefore very important. Well, you will be focusing on Washington, D.C., and cities can divide or bring people together based on social equitable design decisions. So that's why we think inclusion is very urgent and important to involve in your designs as well. One of the building blocks we want to present is from Helen Pineo, 2020, towards healthy urbanism. And Helen makes the division between three types of principles. Healthy urbanism means that it's inclusive, it's equitable, and it's sustainable. Well, if you look at this overview, you can see a city starts with the buildings or the places, the homes where people live. Then you have the neighborhood, the district, the city, and the region. So you can upscale from really close to home to the wider region. And you can see this in the right down graph. Then, of course, there are all types of skills on where you can look at sustainability. For instance, the biodiversity around the homes, but also soil quality, mobility, public safety. All types of sustainability issues are relevant for these people that live in these urban areas. And then, of course, there is local health, ecosystem health, and planetary health. So local health, health of the people and with the nature in which they coexist, ecosystems as such, in a broad term, health, because people are part of ecosystems. And how we look at urbanism is that urban areas are not only buildings, it's not only infrastructure, but it's also ecosystems, it's plants, nature, foods, production sites. All these things are important in the urban ecosystem. So these are relevant building blocks coming from the concept of healthy urbanism. Then Danny Liang and Martin de Jong and Daan Schraver, Lily Wang from 2021 have mapped key features and dimensions of the inclusive city. And of course, you can make a division between social inclusion, economic inclusion, political, environmental, and spatial inclusion. And these all have different questions, and I will come back to that later. But I will give an example. Environmental inclusion means that in our environmental planning and transport infrastructure, but also in sustainability, in water losses, that people are all included in the solutions that are made for the urban areas. And of course, if you talk about the urban greenhouse, we talk about food production. But as you already have heard also from Dr. O'Hara, for instance, during the other presentations and webinars, inclusion is partly, of course, in the food hubs organized, but it means inclusion in terms of possibilities for better environmental health of the people. So, but it also means political inclusion. So, do people have a say in how they can organize their neighborhoods? It means social inclusion. Do people meet each other and understand each other's cultural differences? And last but not least, I want to stress economic inclusion. Do the things that you propose in your design really give people equal economic opportunities? So to make it a bit more straightforward, we propose that there is a tripartite framework for social equity, 3 types of building blocks. And I really like this approach because it gives a good insight in how you can look at inclusion from 3 points of view that are really different from each other and reinforce each other. And I will give also examples later on. So the first one is procedural inclusion. Do people participate in the decision-making process in an equitable way? So people can participate in plan development, in the governance of a plan, and also in and there's also the outreach. Is there specific outreach to marginalized groups? Is it clear what are the marginalized groups as well? So in terms of the Urban Greenhouse Challenge, you could say, what is your plan for participation? And how did people participate in your plan? It would be great if you could really talk with people from the neighborhood and that they have a say in your plan. Then the green one is recognitional distribution. No, sorry, recognitional inclusion. Sorry, it's the acknowledgement and the respect of different groups. This is a very crucial one. If you look at the different cultural backgrounds people have are people's history recognized? Are their needs recognized? And is the plan you have also promoting respect between different people? So, and then the top one is distributional inclusion. That is about equitable distribution of goods, services, and opportunities. So, do people have equal access to goods and services, to environmental amenities, to services and to opportunities, for instance, education and also economic opportunities? So all these building blocks with the questions that are part of it could be addressed in your plan if you really want to have a story about social impact. And then an example of distributional social equity is, for instance, Operation Steenbreek in the Netherlands that tries to promote, you can look it up later in Google if you don't know it yet, but it really tries to promote that people have access to knowledge on greening their own environment. And Steenbreek helps communities to help people to support them also in their green efforts in their environment. So it's very much about access to resources. But also Healing Gardens, that's a project in the Netherlands where especially people that have mental and other health issues can work in the garden, and in this way have access to nature, access to a healing environment, because it's proven that when people work in nature, when they work in gardens, it's good for their health, but not everybody has access to these gardens. So that's another example of distributional social equity. Then there are examples of recognitional social equity. Well, I already said it's very important that people feel acknowledged in their past, in their identity, but also that the projects promote respect. And one of these is that the plea of the IPCC that knowledge of ethnic groups should be used in conservation efforts worldwide. So actually the people that worldwide that have most knowledge about how to deal with natural resources are ethnic groups that are also under threat, where these natural resources like rainforests and other more vulnerable biodiversity hotspots are in threat. So IPCC has a plea: recognize the knowledge of these ethnic groups and use it in our global conservation efforts. Then another one from the Netherlands is that municipalities raise the rainbow flag on Coming Out Day. That means that people, whatever their gender and whatever their sexual orientation, are recognized for their for their position and their background. So that's another completely different example, but I wanted to mention it because it was last week, and it's also something that is really, really big in the Netherlands, and everybody, I guess, knows that this is a way of affirming people's identity and having respect for people's identity. And then last, the procedural social equity. For instance, the United Nations has a major group for children and youth. That's a space for children and youth to have a say in the decisions of the United Nations. Countries all over the world elect a youth representative, and these young people every year can talk about the plans of the United Nations. They can negotiate with delegations of different countries, and in this way they have procedural access actually to decision making on a global level. Another example is the Donut Coalition in Amsterdam, which is a coalition of really local communities that work on urban farming, on climate challenges, on nature conservation, but also on equity issues. And the municipality of Amsterdam wants to give them a say also in the plans that they make. For instance, a master plan in Nieuw West Amsterdam, but also the master plan in Zuidoost, known also as the Bijlmer. If you do not know so much about the situation in Amsterdam, it's very interesting to read about the Bijlmer area, where a lot of different cultural people from cultural backgrounds have worked. And for instance, you have there the Bijlmer sisters. That's a group of women that are really working with community gardens and people in the area, and through their Donut Coalition, they and other types of procedural social equity, they also have a say in what is happening in Amsterdam, for instance, with the master plan. So that's a really nice case study to have a look at. So to summarize, inclusive design is about procedural equity, recognitional equity, and distributional equity. And procedural equity engages different members, different stakeholders to create ideas, imagine solutions, and decide and plan initiatives. And it also measures success through this community participation and co-creation. So that's the basic of procedural equity. Recognitional equity values human differences and comprehensively considers the needs of all races, cultures, and vulnerable populations in design. It considers the importance of history and culture in placemaking, and it eliminates racism and discrimination and provides equal access and use of, in this case, public space. Distributional equity demonstrates strategies to fairly distribute high quality, sufficient and accessible resources for food, housing, education and healthcare across the city and within communities. And it provides planning and development for infrastructure. And we will have a lot of examples later on from Dr. Franz and Harris about this type of equity. And it also offers economic opportunities through policy and programs, providing jobs through education and training. So it measures success through resource, infrastructure, and economic improvements. So I hope that this triple framework for inclusive design might help you with your own design for the Urban Greenhouse Challenge. And now I give the floor to Dr. Franz and Dr. Harris. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions concerning Dr. Stuiver's presentation before we begin? Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Eric and I are here at the University of District of Columbia in the Department of Architecture and Urban Sustainability, and we are very, very pleased to be able to discuss this topic of inclusive design. And our design canvas for inclusion is really focused on the implications for creating architecture for well-being. And design for well-being begins with recognizing human needs and dignity and explores healthy living to co-create inclusive environments. And this really requires a very holistic approach, and it's not a single parameter approach. It considers multiple approaches at the same time. So we have constructed this discussion around the tripartite approach. So from our perspective, from a designer perspective, we are looking at recognitional equity, which equates to human needs and dignity. And this is at the scale of the individual. And it takes time for us to collect and understand the diversity in human, what their needs are, their histories, skills, and as it relates to physical, social, mental, and spiritual health. For procedural equity, we're looking at healthy living, and this is about finding solutions and applying those building blocks to improve health outcomes and quality of life, and this is at the scale of relationships. Distributional equity is equated to inclusive environments, and this is about co-creating designs that allow equal distribution of resources in architecture, landscape, and interior design, and it's at the scale of urban resources.
Okay. So with recognitional equity, right, it's really about empathy. We started the framework of empathy, and that begins with developing, understanding backgrounds, the problems of different groups, soliciting by capturing user ideas and preferences, storytelling, and acknowledging personal biases. And a lot of times that happens not just at, it always happens at the local level, being able to first empathize with people, understanding what those problems are, and being able to hear out their stories, listen to them and their challenges. Because the whole part about equity itself is making things accessible, equal for all, And that can happen, for example, if you are trying to address, let's say, designing for someone who is deaf or blind. If you yourself are not one of those things, or you don't have a mental or physical disability, it's really about understanding those things. And typically we do that even in architecture and design by surveying, having focus groups, interviews, and those things are ways to understand human needs and ultimately dignifying the people that we are serving, because it's not about us, but it's about everyone being inclusive, and it's a user-centered design rather a self-focused design. So for procedure equity, that next phase to promote healthy living begins with design thinking, and that's with connecting with stakeholders. We keep learning through this process by working with individuals within various industries that can present their knowledge, their expertise, and also bringing in stakeholders within the community to ultimately collaborate and engage and analyze what are the social, economical, even political, issues that are happening within a specific community or several communities, and being able to develop or at least brainstorm possible solutions to them. And that definitely is implemented by focusing on pro-social rather than self-centered. Again, the goal is really about inclusive design and being able to include everyone at the table so that the design is equitable, accessible to everyone, and ultimately just bringing everyone kind of together full circle. For distributional equity, that involves designing inclusive environments or co-creation. And we do that by identifying, creating focus and purpose through placemaking and place finding. We also do that by identifying public spaces, and that's where we connect the theory to the practice itself and provide equal access through participation and enjoyment. We also do that through activity, defining pathways and spaces for physical, social, mental, and spiritual activities, education, as well as transportation, and through nature, integrating the built environment with nature to promote health and wellness. And even, for example, my background is in architecture as well as interior design. And we, as designers, we live by a standard of care where we focus on health, safety, and well-being. And those three things, they're non-negotiable. They are in everything we do, everything we design, those three things, those components are included or together, and they work in sync with one another. And even for those who don't necessarily have a design background, the same thing still applies within your field, being able to create, but focusing and creating a place for people. And that helps, and that by integrating nature within that, well, we call it biophilic design, but integrating biophilic design into that, it brings nature outside into that built environment.
So we created this design canvas for inclusion as a map for you to be able to connect these three concepts about recognition, procedure, and distribution. But also, you have the challenge in the war competition of understanding people and their needs, connecting that to community, creating something new on the side, and also focusing on adding food production and other amenities that you might want to explore. So there's a lot of information, and I want this map was designed to be able to simplify the challenge that you have ahead of you. So if you go horizontally, you can see the green. I just discussed the recognition, procedure, and distribution, but if you read it across human needs, have to connect to healthy living, have to connect to inclusive environments. Then under that in blue, we talk about the research that has been conducted and supports physical, social, mental, and spiritual health, and how that connects to interactive settings for quality of life, and then how that connects to sustainable placemaking and place finding. The most difficult thing that architects and designers, landscape architects have is connecting theory, translating theory to practice. So if you now go vertically down these columns, and let's start with recognition. So there's just an abundant amount of evidence, research and evidence that talk about about human needs. And one of the simpler models is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And in that theory, individuals have to be physiologically safe, and they have to be safe. They have to have love and belonging and self-esteem and self-actualization for them to really reach their human potential. And there's all of the evidence from science, from neuroscience, sociology, psychology, environmental and the biological sciences. We have evidence that the decisions that we make in the built environment contribute to individuals' health. And there are many decisions that you can make that really promote health, and decisions that you can make that actually do not promote health. So it's really important to think about light, color, sound, the types of spaces that people are more comfortable in order to inform your design. One of the most important areas in theory, I believe, is cultural anthropology and the research that has been done on ethics. Cultural anthropology really looks at human culture, and it really describes the fact that while we are all very different and we may live in different backgrounds, come from different backgrounds, live in different countries, at the very core, we are all humans, and we all have the same desire for respect, dignity, involvement, decision-making, providing shelter, homes, improving our society. We all have that, and that is really core to what this challenge is really about. And so through user-centered design, we now can figure out and make sure that we have recognized an inclusive discussion through mapping users' journey, thinking about what their skills and needs are, and also including them in asking for their perspectives, and really taking into account stakeholders' history, their heritage, and contributions that they've made to their communities. Communities are very important to everyone, and making communities better and improving them and making sure that they're very inclusive for all is really critical to success. If we move over now to procedural equity, the theory there really looks, Eric explained a little bit about the 5 pillars for economic development, and that is key to the types of facilities and opportunities that people must have to be able to improve their life and really grow and flourish. And so there's much, also there's a lot of research on equitable access, which has to do with the need for shelter, the type of shelter, public services, infrastructure, safety, job opportunities, and through design, there are many documented research studies about how physical activity make humans healthier, natural environments promote health, and that with proper approaches to incorporating ways to enhance food production and incorporate that in urban environments, that we can improve nutrition. Health and wellness health and wellness science tells us also that individuals have a need to connect, to give, to keep learning, and just continue to grow. And so through design thinking, and you will have this challenge in your teams, you will have to go through many different scenarios to figure out whether you have really identified ways for the community to participate and to interact in this new scheme that you're going to propose. And so, the important thing is to, under procedural equity, is to make sure that, you're connecting, that you are finding ways to keep people active, you're helping the kinds of designs that you're proposing, and the landscape and site design that you're proposing is helping people to take notice by giving them a moment to pause and look and think, to keep learning, and also to for they themselves to also be concerned about including everyone in the community, so that it just becomes a really special place. And the one aspect that I think that is probably the hardest is, as a team, really working through those scenarios, because design thinking is really critical, because it really helps you solve problems, but it also drives innovation. And innovation either comes through, radical innovation really occurs when there are technical epiphanies that you're able to add into your projects, and change meaning. And change meaning is most important to architecture, landscape architecture, and design, because change meaning is how we change the world and think about putting things together in a different way and creating a special experience. Then if you move over to the vertical box under distributional equity, now we're talking about the theory that has to do with sustainable placemaking and place finding. And there, again, is an abundance of research on green cities, circularity, and sustainability. And there also is information and research in architecture that has to do with order and amenities and aesthetics. And so form, function, space, materiality are all very important to the choices that you make are important, because some materials really promote a healthy environment and others don't. And under resilient eco-city design and architecture comes a number of engineering innovations for both materials, structure, building systems, integrating those building systems. So when you take that theory and all that evidence and you convert it to practice, it's really through a process of co-creation that you really find a way to create better neighborhoods with nature, that you're including moving and access, that it's involving eating and nutrition, and that you're also taking into account indoor and outdoor environmental quality. You're using innovative materials and systems. You're applying smart technology. You're really concerned with improving building performance, energy, and water conservation. So this is a simple map, but if you use it both horizontally and vertically, you will be able to come up with the best design solutions. So some thinking, it has to be done that's very linear, but some thinking as a designer has to be concurrent. You have to be able to imagine all of this information at one time, and you combine that with the program that you've been given to come up with innovative solutions. So it's a little oversimplified, but that is really it's a crystallized version of what you will have to do in this seminar, or the challenge, excuse me. So now we want to run you through imagining inclusive design solutions. First, we want to acknowledge Tortigalis and their partners. They're an architecture firm here. And the sketches and renderings that you will be seeing are intended to, really enhance your imagination. And we just wanted to acknowledge their beautiful work and the work that they have done to help build better communities.
So the first set of diagrams that you guys see at the bottom right deals with the rule of thumb for equal distribution, and that's connecting the urban environment with nature, providing universal access and creating communal spaces. So even with the first one, urban environments, I think the watercolors really are good examples because it's very playful, but at the same time, just giving a broader conceptual idea versus seeing something more like rendered that we typically see in design. But creating these urban environments that will connect with nature in order to be accessible, which is the middle part, accessible to everyone. And it goes beyond just designing for barrier free, because typically we think of just ADA, but this incorporates everything from someone who is physically disabled, as well as blind, deaf, etc. Creating that accessibility that everyone will be inclusive in the community in which they inhabit. And these communal spaces is what ties us all together. And again, going back to what I was sharing about empathy, creating those spaces that are communal, that will create, that will foster relationships and dialogues, and ultimately, just be a place where people can call their own. The next one is the next rule of thumb for equal distribution is providing views, designing points of interest, as well as walkable public spaces. So typically, even in buildings, we want to have views that that can be seen of the natural and built environment, and ultimately create interest within those views, so that it is not just design pleasing, right? But interesting in the fact that you normally wouldn't see certain things together. For example, in this context, right, we talk about urban food hubs or farming, vertical farming. There's that agriculture component of it, but then also too, there's a design architectural component, and putting those two together, creating interesting spaces and moments that not only serve the community, but it's also that's also a model for other people to design. And public spaces that are, again, it goes back to that word accessible, being open, but public spaces that creates moments within cities that people, and usually we see those in green spaces, in parks, in play yards for children, etc. But creating those moments that are for everyone, from young to old. The next one, rule of thumb of equal distribution, is connecting the urban environment, providing safety, fostering activity, and taking notice and enhancing complete streets. And in terms of safety, even within architectural design and as well as interior design, those elements are prevalent when we're designing spaces, because we do want to make them safe. And there's even people who have certifications or specialize in those areas to design where it will be safe for the inhabitants. And also too, activities that can be not just indoors, but definitely outdoors, and connect everyone, and have complete streets that are not constricting. And what I mean by that, for example, if you're someone who is, deaf, there's examples where kind of the street walk is too small, where they're signing. So some people have to then walk in the actual street itself, and that's not safe, right? So being able to have complete streets that are open and that addresses those needs. And the next one is rule of thumbs is for using available land for food production and gardening, connecting movement and urban functions, and providing economic opportunity. And again, that goes back to the urban food hub models and urban farming. We see this a lot in rooftop gardens in design. There are companies that actually specialize in this. For example, like Freight Farm, they provide like these containers where you can do everything from vertical gardening, aquaponics, etc. Depending on what your farming needs are. There are other organizations and companies that are working towards sustainability. And ultimately, within this also to connecting movement, be able to create circulation within these spaces that ties one part of an area or community to the other. And that's not just with buildings, that's also with bridges and even the public spaces that I mentioned in the last slide. And economy, really creating, ultimately it being equitable for everyone. When we think of economy, and even with the Urban Greenhouse Challenge, for example, Ward 7, the nearest grocery store is about 3.4 miles to the East Capitol Urban Farm. And that within itself is a problem because as far as food, it's not as accessible to the surrounding neighborhoods that are within that part of Northeast/Southeast DC. So again, creating economical and equitable opportunities that will allow for everyone to have access, and ultimately inclusive. I mean, I know we're throwing that word inclusive out, but again, you can correlate those things to all of these. And lastly, integrating the urban fabric, finding urban play space, and taking the time to share. So again, integration, everything from modern to historic, young to old, abled to disabled, creating that integration that will include everyone. And even play, it's not necessarily looked in the view of necessarily children, but even as adults, we use other terms for the word play. But again, having buildings, having spaces that are fun and engaging, that are interesting, and ultimately it's addressing the needs of the people, right? The communities, the surrounding communities that we inhabit, and the spaces, the built environment, and going into interior environments, all of those connecting people to one another.
So this is a summary from our discussion that we presented here, and what we wanted to do is make sure that we conclude with showing that there are many issues that you have to consider in your design, but at the end of the day, you really do have to come up with a solution that connects people to place with the program that you've been challenged with. And it's all about imagining inclusive design solutions, and that the choices that you make in how you create your indoor production facility, the changes that you make to the site, and the way that you engage the community into the space will all be important as you move forward. What I wanted to do is just end, and this information is not on the slide, but I wanted to end by giving you a couple of places where you may want to just check in, because it gives you really wonderful information on design. So the first one is, there's no better theory than going back to Vitruvius when it comes to architecture. And under his theory, he connected health to comfort, to happiness and delight in the way that he discusses through his 10 books on architecture. So if you are have a few extra minutes, you can skim that. Travis Price is an architect here in the District of Columbia, and he has written a book called The Archaeology of Tomorrow. And in that book, he discusses 3 concepts, which is stillness, movement in nature, and those are the essential elements to creating great designs. Then also Robert Gutman is a social scientist, and Dr. Gutman was at Princeton University for his entire career. He became an architect, and he has done some remarkable work on social science. And again, another person to just check in, look at that work, because it's essential to the way that you shape your space. Dr. Anderson from the University of Cambridge, he has written and published on 5 ways to well-being, and I think that that's another great piece of research article to look at. And then the last one that I would leave you with is, in final summary, you have to connect the goals, the vision, all of these whole system design processes to outcomes. And when you're able to connect those 4 concepts together in your project, then you'll have a successful project. And from our perspective at the University of District of Columbia, we're very excited to see your solutions and very, very much look forward to continuing to work with you. Are there any questions?
There are plenty of questions. So we can now move to the last part of this webinar and take some questions and discuss them. When I look at the chat, actually, so maybe I would like to start by saying that I'm really impressed that there's you really broaden my perspective on what does inclusive design mean. I always had a very simplistic view of that, and now you showed so many different aspects of that. So it's really mind-blowing. And I think when I observe the discussion on the chat, the students are now a little bit searching for answer okay, so where to start, especially in this specific context of the Is Capital Urban Farm. So if we could start by by giving some practical tips, because I see you can do so much and you can go so in depth, but of course they're also limited by the fact that they are not at the site, they don't have so good access to it. So how would you go about it? What would you suggest to them?
I can take that question. I would suggest that all good design starts with a really deep understanding of the problem. And so given that this is in many regards, a theoretical challenge where you are having to make many assumptions, you can understand the problem. We all understand the problem of food insecurity and what it takes to promote jobs and what it takes to connect, the way that you have to approach connecting people to that site and enhancing it in a way to make the world better, right? But you have to start with a deep understanding of the problem, and then you have to start to map out what really, and that's really about, then the next step is really setting goals, and then creating that vision for the future. And you will, through design thinking and through co-creation and working in your team, you'll come up with what the outcome will be. But you just start with the problem and creating a vision for what you want to see in the future.
Do you want to add on that, Marian? Oh, you are muted. We cannot hear you. No, if it doesn't work, you can just leave the room and come back. No. Oh, now we can hear a little bit, but very, very softly. That's really a pity. I can hear myself actually.
Yeah, we can hear
We can
you.
hear you.
Maybe you can just leave the room and re-enter it once again. Maybe then the problem will be fixed. Yeah. So then we can continue a little bit with Eric and Anna. So there was a question from Monica who was actually asking if you can give some examples of your favorite projects where those principles have been applied.
Yes, and you will have the opportunity, and you can actually access this through the website of the Architect of the Capitol. We took a number of steps to integrate both the landscape and experience of walking around the buildings to bringing it to the experience within the buildings. And on the botanical garden, there are a number of revisions made to that garden, which has created wonderful space. And has been a lot of care taken at the Architect of the Capitol to connect that campus setting and those buildings to the rest of the Washington, D.C. area.
Could you put the link in the chat, perhaps?
Yes, we will do that.
So, Marianne, how is it? Could you try to say something?
It's unfortunate.
And with headphones, would that work?
So Marta, I have another example that we would like to give, which is actually at the University of District of Columbia. Been a lot of effort here to green the college campus and create spaces for social interaction and make it accessible to all. And food is being grown on the roof and in every available space on the campus. And again, it's another remarkable example of sort of integrating all of these concepts, providing educational opportunities and involvement.
That's very great. Cool to have those two examples. We still cannot hear you, Marianne.
Do we need to mute ourselves while Marianne speaks, do you think?
We could try to do that. But I'm not sure if that will solve the problem. I was wondering actually, because you are talking about those 3 different types of equity. Is it that they are like you need to integrate all of 3 of them, or you can focus on one specific type of equity scale? Like,
I think you have, from my perspective, you have to think about how to integrate all aspects, all 3.
Yeah.
And the hardest thing in design is seeking simplicity. Great design brings you to a moment of silence and stillness because it inspires you, and that takes it takes a remarkable amount of time to come up with the simplest of approaches. The simpler, if you can find that simplicity, it doesn't have to be complicated. It just has to be simple, elegant, and clear that it's inclusive, clear that it connects people, clear that it provides a place, and the kinds of space that sort of bring you to your knees almost because they're so beautiful. We've all been to beautiful gardens and buildings, and they're all inspiring. And that's and when people are inspired, and it just brings delight to their life. And so that's all. Architecture is all about happiness and beauty and delight.
Yeah, and when you are in this kind of places, you really think, oh, it's very simple. Everybody can do it. But indeed, when you try to do it yourself, it doesn't work so well sometimes.
Yeah, I think probably the easiest way, the way I'm thinking, like for example, for recognitional equity, I think about research and development, right? We start at the phase of kind of researching what that problem is, and you know that includes everything from our biases, assumptions, et cetera. But by the time we get to the procedural equity, that's where we're brainstorming, we're problem solving, we're thinking, initially thinking of some solutions. And for distributional equity, it's where we take whatever hypothesis we have or what we envision, we implement it, and we say, is this the best solution that fits this scenario or that problem that we're trying to solve? You know, and that could be everything from, like, let's say you just don't have enough land to, you know, grow to, you know, to either build something or even grow something. You have to work around that, and architects do that all the time. So we have a lot of challenges that we face, but you know, that's kind of just like small breakdown. I mean, it's more nuanced when we're actually designing, but.
Well, the best designs come from the greatest amount of constraints, right? So.
Very nice. Very good tips for the participants of the challenge. Marianne, should we try once again if your audio works? I think it doesn't work, yeah? Yeah, that's very unfortunate.
Also too, Marta, Dr. Marian can type in the chat, but we can't type in the chat. There's a box here to type to everyone, but we can't type actual text.
Okay. Well, I think we are now wrapping up. So if you have some questions you would like to answer, you can just write the answers in the email, and then I will share it with everybody. I think there were some requests for the links that you have been discussing, and there were also people asking if you could write down your tips. So the tips that you were just sharing, if you could just put it in the bullet points, then I can distribute among the participants of this webinar. And I think we can close the discussion for the moment. So it's a pity that Marianne is not here, but I would like to very warmly thank you for this presentation. I was really inspired, and I hope that everybody participating will be very inspired as well. And I will upload the presentation to the platform so people can look back at it, because there was really a lot of input for everybody. And I hope that we'll see the principles you were discussing reflected back in the first milestone and in the second milestone reports. So thank you very much. Have a good day, have a good afternoon, and thank you for joining. Bye.
Thank you.
I think I fixed it.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
Okay, we just said. Okay.
So yeah, I'm really sorry. I don't know. I didn't do anything between the presentation and the discussion, so I have no idea. It's a mystery, but I fixed it. But I'm too late, I think.
But if you still want to share something and some tips, advice for students, you are very welcome to.
Yeah, I was thinking in line with what Dr. Franz was saying about really getting a good understanding of the situation. There is, of course, a lot of literature, but I also think that for the first proposal, it would be good if the students well, like a shadow methods or theory of change behind what are the reasons you choose for certain designs. So who do you try to address? Is it distributional equity that you focus on? So maybe not necessarily, it's of course difficult to really get into contact with the people that live in the ward, but you can already say, okay, once we would have this design, we would do the outreach in this way, because so I think already having an understanding of what the different steps would be very relevant, I think. And then you can, in the second term, when the field visits are there, you can also ask people this type of questions to make it more concrete.
I think it's a great advice.
Yeah. And I also say it's a bit of, trial, but, making efforts, doing it, and also don't be afraid to do it. I mean, in my own career, I have made a lot of participatory mistakes. You promise people things and you can't do it. That's these things. Everybody has sometimes made this type of mistakes. So it's also good in the group to discuss this. Like maybe someone is very enthusiastic about participation, but then what does it mean for expectation? Because if you invite everybody to talk about, for instance, the design, you also have to disappoint people. So all this type of questions and discussions, it's very worthwhile to have it and share it in your group, and also to give a short story to the jury about how you think you should deal with these things in the future.
Great. Thanks,
Yeah.
Marianne, for those remarks. So I was closing the session by thanking all of you for presenting and for sharing your insights, and everybody watching for joining us today. Have a good afternoon, have a good evening, and good luck with your designs. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.